Good morning to you all, honored members of the Board of Visitors, my hardworking colleagues on the staff and faculty, faithful family and friends, but most of all, good morning to the graduating class of 2023. You should see this view. You are impressive. You're also a little intimidating. You're intimidating not just because there's so many of you, but you're intimidating because you are fierce and courageous. When COVID demanded isolation, this class forged creative and courageous communities. When tragedy struck last November, you demonstrated compassion and care, reaching out, supporting, and crying. Yeah, you have loved well. We have learned that love conquers fear. Yes, you, the graduating class of 2023, are a courageous bunch of love warriors. So as I've been thinking through what I might say to you all today, one of the first questions I had to ask myself was, which Lewis Nelson do I bring to the podium? Do I bring the architectural historian, the scholar who's, yeah, I hear you. My peeps. Maybe the architectural historian, the scholar who's always ready to deliver a monologue on the gravity of the past and the ways that our history is inscribed in the buildings and landscapes we enjoy, and that those ways that those buildings and landscapes tell us who we are and who we have been. Maybe I bring the sometimes quirky goofball, the college guy who loved to dance all night to Whitney Houston, MC Hammer, and the B-52s. The dad who spent weeks planning spectacular decorations for his kids' birthday cakes. Or maybe I bring Lewis Nelson, the tender-hearted, the grown man who cries at movies, who feels deeply the pain of having lost and hurt someone, but who also knows eternal forgiveness and God's amazing grace. Now, I asked this question, which Lewis? I asked this question because when I first received the email from President Ryan inviting me to deliver today's address, my first reaction was like, really? The last person these students want to hear is some nutty professor. But then I noticed that the nominating committee wished me to address the topic of public service. As many of you will know, UVA was founded with the specific intent of graduating students committed to our nascent republic. Research has also shown that our incoming students arrive at UVA with more experience in public service than all of our peers. At our founding and in this moment, public service is baked into the DNA of this place. To that end, our team has recently launched an exciting new program called Public Service Pathways that we hope will only deepen our preparation of you, our graduates, to serve our great Commonwealth and to defend the fragile democracy that undergirds our great nation. In this program, we believe that excellence in public service centers the flourishing of others. Now, I've come to this conviction because I've learned some lessons over the years. 3 lessons that I'm going to use to frame my remarks this morning. Be human, commit to community, and see the gap. The first lesson I've learned, be human. So I'm an architectural historian, but one of my field methodologies is building archaeology. This means that I'm trained to examine old but otherwise unremarkable buildings, to look for subtle aesthetic and technological signatures that allow me to date a building and its changes over time. For example, in one of my classes, I deliver a 3-hour lecture on the history of the nail. That's right. So it turns out most buildings have nails. And it agreed, even the lawyers agree. Oh, sorry. Where are the lawyers? Over there. I'll get to you. All right. Apologies. So it turns out that most buildings have nails, and by examining a few nails, one can pinpoint those nails in technological time, and therefore date a building's construction in a particular historical era. It's a really fun party trick. Soon after I arrived, I'm a total blast at parties. Soon after I arrived at UVA, a colleague suggested that I teach a summer field school that would train UVA students in these field methods. Having completed a summer of work in Jamaica for my dissertation, I reconnected with some Jamaican partners, and together we planned and launched a summer field school in Falmouth, which is on Jamaica's north coast. The first few summers went pretty well. Students worked with Jamaican carpenters and masons and learned the fundamentals of traditional building trades. We documented a range of important early buildings, and we helped to stabilize and preserve the houses of those unable to afford these necessary repairs. Students were learning a lot. But there was one homeowner who remained uninterested in our research project. She lived in what promised to be a very important two-room house. So early in the third summer, I walked up, I knocked on the door, and with the warmest possible smile, I shared with her what we were hoping to accomplish during these field schools. She smiled back and closed the door. A few weeks into our fourth summer, we learned that a radio station had selected Falmouth as the stage for a nationally broadcast street party. The evening came, and students insisted that their quirky professor come along. Thousands of people filled the square, and adjacent to the courthouse was a huge bandstand that was flanked by enormous speaker walls and floods of lights. Now, at a break in the music, the DJ came out on stage, and she announced a dance contest. She invited up a very excited late elementary-age girl from the front of the crowd. A shirtless and buff 20-something came up. And then she paused, and she looked out of the crowd. Tall white man. I looked for the other tall white guy. He didn't exist. So I made my way to the bandstand. The first two were amazing dancers. They set the crowd on fire. Then it was my turn. So the speakers exploded with Jamaican dancehall. I kicked off my Birkenstocks and said, "Stop, it's hammer time." My students froze, mouths gaping, while the entire crowd exploded in astonished cheers. Now, I have a small reminder of that night that lives in the corner of my office. It's a walking stick. There we are. It's a walking stick carved by one of the Jamaican artisans and presented to me by the team on our last night. It's hard to read, but it actually says "Crazy Legs Nelson." It was a totally fun night. The next day, I received a message. I received a message from Rosie Smalls, the owner of that little house down the street. She'd requested a visit. She opened the door with a smile. "You're quite a dancer." And so began the first of our many long conversations on her porch. We shared stories of our children and our otherwise very, very different lives. Miss Rosie invited me to church the next Sunday, and by the end of the season, she told me that if our team returned the next summer, that we might document her house. Miss Rosie wanted to know that I was human. Bringing my full self to the table, first at the dance party, and then again and again through many conversations, we built trust. Only when Miss Rosie knew that I was fully human did she invite me into her world. My first approach had been to her as a scholar, but then she quickly learned that I was also a goofball, that I loved to dance. She also came to know me as a white man prepared to confess his own brokenness. We all face the temptation to curate multiple selves, to put on masks. Miss Rosie taught me to reject that fragmentation, to integrate the scholar, the goofball, and the caring friend. So just this past fall, I was actually back in Falmouth, and I paid Miss Rosie a visit. Her house is painted brilliant orange. It still has a nice tight roof. The royal palms we helped plant in her backyard now soar over the rest of the block. Her daughter has graduated from high school and gone on to college here in the United States. And Miss Rosie proudly shares the history of her building with any interested passerby. The second lesson I've learned: commit to community. Now, many of you will know that in August of 2017, this very space became the stage for a hateful march of torch-bearing white supremacists, followed by a day of horror downtown. Within weeks of those events, Andrea Douglas of the Jefferson School downtown and Jelaine Schmidt of the Memory Project here at UVA began to dream of a community-centered event that would showcase strength and resilience through collective action. Those convictions eventually took the form of a week-long pilgrimage, a pilgrimage of 100 representatives from across our community traveling to civil rights sites in the South. I was honored that Andrea and Jelaine invited me to join their efforts. So on July 8th, 2018, 2 buses pulled out of Charlottesville on a week-long journey, a journey that would change my life. We spent days at various historic sites, from Appomattox to the National Civil Rights Center in Atlanta. Recognizing that we were from Charlottesville, these sites carried a particular poignancy. But even so, I sensed a deeper pain carried by our African American travelers. Our final stop was Brian Stevenson's Equal Justice Initiative. There we delivered a jar of soil from a site just outside of Charlottesville, where in 1898 an unmasked white mob lynched John Henry James, a black man accused of making a pass at a white woman. We cried together. We spent long hours talking, processing the weight of these histories for our city. Yet we were also building community. They trusted me with their moments of pain. But we also laughed, and yes, we danced. Those long conversations, those hours together, birthed sustained friendships. We have since dined at each other's houses, and over time, these friends have expanded my imagination for community, both here at UVA and across Charlottesville. And that was the point. In extending to me an invitation to join them, Andrea and Jelaine invited me into not just a temporary community, but into sustained relationships. They taught me the important lesson of committing to a community where I was in the minority. Taught me the lesson of committing to a community where I was in the minority. Now, some of you have just given me the side eye. You're saying to yourself, Nelson, I've been in the minority on grounds every day for the last 4 years. That's right. And I want to thank you. And I want to say that in making that commitment, you have made UVA a far better place. By bringing distinct experiences and viewpoints, you have challenged all of us to think more carefully, more critically. We are all smarter because you are here. We at UVA are committed to diversity because we're committed to excellence in education. So for those of you that know what it means to be a minority here at UVA, I see you and I thank you. I thank you for being among us. Now, for the rest of us, I have a word of advice. Seek out and commit to a community where you are in the minority. We must learn to reject the echo chamber of constrained communities and build instead courageous communities that challenge us to listen well, to build empathy, to think more critically with greater nuance and complexity. The dehumanizing extremes of isolated self-determination or suffocating social homogeneity are best mediated by a daily dose of healthy democratic society. Lesson 3, see the gap. So earlier this semester, I had the great pleasure of hearing lawyer, social justice advocate, and deeply faithful Christian Brian Stevenson speak at JPJ. Any of you all were there? Really? 2 in the front. Okay. Look him up. He's amazing. Stevenson has spent his time unpacking his lifelong commitment to challenging the structural inequities built into America's broken justice and carceral systems. He has a deep love for America's ideal commitments to justice and truth. But he's equally passionate about bridging the gap between those ideals and the reality on the ground. He's quick to remind us that America has the highest percentage of incarcerated citizens of any country in the world, and that the preponderance of those individuals are African American men, far greater than their representation in the general population. He sees the gap. He sees the gap between the ideal and the real. And he has spent his life closing that gap, one wrongly adjudicated case at a time. The importance of this work has come home to me over the past few years, as I've had the honor of working closely with descendants of our enslaved community. Detisa Gathers, Bertha French, Colleen Yates, and others advocate for hundreds of people who worked as enslaved laborers here at UVA. These amazing women have helped me to see this space, this academical village, is also an African American historical site. A landscape deeply inscribed with memories that were erased from the formal historical record. A landscape where hundreds of couples fell in love, struggled to raise children, and died, often separated one from the other. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so proud to see UVA leading this nation in this conversation. We have researched and published the truths of our history as books with shorter versions available and disseminated widely on digital platforms. One of our own faculty launched and now convenes the nationally recognized consortium called Universities Studying Slavery. 100 universities seeking to better understand their own stories. And the nationally celebrated Memorial to Enslaved Laborers, behind you all, has become the gold standard for demonstrating the importance of continuously marking and reshaping our landscapes. Because when words fail us as they so often do, our buildings and our landscapes remind us who we have been. They remind us who we are. Our architecture is our collective memory. We must with vigilance curate our grounds towards the community we wish to be. Architecture can help us close the gap between the real and the ideal. For those of you in the back, that's my amazing dean, Dean Malo. Detisa, Bertha, and Colleen have helped me see the gaps in personal access and experiences, not just in the past, but in the present. And they've helped me see the ways that those gaps might be closed. These women have reminded me of the truth that slavery happened to one person at a time. They've challenged me to confirm Jefferson's conviction that we should follow the truth wherever it may lead. The truth of our past demands a response in the present. Yes, this is a university whose founding story is inextricably linked to the promises of a fledgling democracy. We will not turn our backs on the ideals woven by Jefferson and others into the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. But it is also a place that was home to a strong and vibrant community, a community systematically excluded from those same promises, from those same rights. Those foundational documents not only permit, but actually encourage transformation, growth, and change. They were, after all, born of revolution. History reports that we have a moral responsibility and institutional debt. And at UVA, we are truth tellers, courageous enough to go toe-to-toe with our own demons. Do we have the courage to see the gap between the ideal and the real, both in the past and also in the present? Yes, we do. This is hard work, but UVA is worth it. I dare say America is worth it. Now, this is not an invitation to self-flagellation or beating ourselves up. Let me be clear. I love UVA. I've dedicated 2 decades of my life to this institution. I want this university to be the very best institution it can be. But we cannot be that great institution unless we have the courage to tell the truth about who we have been. Only then are we equipped to lead with integrity. We do this work out of love for alma mater, because UVA has the unique opportunity to lead the nation towards the complexities of our own moment. This is an invitation to the work of loving our neighbor, of bringing our best selves to the table, and of committing to flourishing communities. For what is democracy if it is not a commitment to flourishing communities? We cannot do this work without the courage and humility, without the lessons that we've now all learned from Miss Rosie, from Andrea and Jelaine, from Datisa, Bertha, and Colleen. And I challenge you to carry these lessons forward. What are they? What was lesson 1? Be human. Bring your full self to the table. Lesson 2? Commit to community, especially across difference. And lesson 3? See the gap and have the courage to close the gap. These 3 lessons, I believe, are fundamentals to a life committed to public service. And ladies and gentlemen, public service is democracy in action. Now let me end by speaking to each of you by schools. Nursing. Education. And medicine. Nursing, education, and medicine. Your first commitment is by definition the well-being of your neighbors. You are here because your first love is to love others. Thank you. All right, data science. Engineering. Okay, I've only got 20 minutes. And architecture. All right, data science, engineering, and architecture. You give shape to real and to digital environments, spaces that can be powerful agents of democracy or of exclusion. Remember that your highest call is to make spaces of healthfulness and justice. SCPS. There we are, small but mighty. SCPS, you are invited into the work of engaging communities, listening to their needs, pursuing their betterment through the choices that you make every day. That's right. All right, lastly, Batten. Commerce. Darden. I got you. All right. And law. All right, Batten, Commerce, Darden, and Law. Hear me. Your commencement is an invitation into the halls of power. Reject the temptation of self-interest. Take the high road. Take the high road and direct your power towards collective flourishing, because in following the narrow path, by caring for some, you strengthen democracy for everyone. Now for all of you, today you graduate into the ranks of Wahoos. Wahoos incredibly well equipped to do this work. You are all called to love your neighbors, to create spaces of health and justice, engaging your communities, and using your power for positive change. As you step past the academical village, remember these lessons and let them be a reminder to you that to be a graduate of the University of Virginia is to be deployed towards democracy. That's right. You all are courageous love warriors, remember? You are forged in the crucible of COVID, and you are now commissioned to lead this nation towards the ideals to which we all aspire. Ladies and gentlemen, go forth and spread democracy. Congratulations on your graduation.